Well, good morning and welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and as you can see this morning, my green screen is visible. For some reason, the virtual background, which I've been using for the last couple of years, has failed to display today. I've been fiddling with the settings trying to get it to work with no success. Anyway, Richard's here. Good morning to you, Richard. Nice to see you. We've got a good show for you today. The content has been slightly juggled from what I suggested it might be 2 hours ago, as a couple of new stories have appeared. So what are we starting with on show number 399 on Sunday the 7th of January? We're a motorcyclist sadly has been killed by a lion in Kenya. A Kent rider is fighting the council after suffering life-changing injuries following a crash he blamed on a pothole. MEPs have fortunately thrown out the idea for differential motorcycle speed limits, which would have seen riders having to obey lower limits than other vehicles on roads, which was bonkers. A pavement parking ban is coming in Edinburgh, and so if you're up in the Scottish capital, you need to be aware of that. Could affect you if you park on the pavement on your motorcycle. A Swedish helmet airbag company has gone under, sadly, after a product ban from their local consumer agency in Sweden. And Ian Hutchinson is back for the TT, one of my favourite riders. We'll look at his career. And then finally, look out Triumph. Zontes is pitching a new middleweight triple. And then finally, the in-depth item today is a look at Yamaha and their interview with Motorcycle News, where they talked about their take on future fuels. So stay with me for the next 30 odd minutes while I cover all those items. So what else have we got to talk about today? Let's just turn that off. Don't forget, if you have a question, a comment, anything you want to say, I'm always happy to answer you. I'll try to do it on the show if I possibly can. If I can't, I will get back to you after the show. Right, so with no more ado, let's get on with things. Now, I do get some surprising emails. Obviously, a lot of people asking me if I want to invest in their web design skills and things like that. But on Friday, I got one of the more unusual ones. I got an invitation to participate in the 23rd Shanghai International Gift and Household Goods Exhibition 2024. That's if you really want to go, between May the 6th and 8th this year. Now, apparently the organizer believes that my company would be a valuable addition to the event, appearing alongside brands such as Calvin Klein. Well, anyway, rather than head to China, I will remind you that you are actually invited to my next online talk event. This is January's. This will take place on what's going on here? That's not right. Everything's going wrong this morning. It's amazing, isn't it? I spend hours getting the show sorted out, and come the moment, something always seems to go wrong. And that's for the next item. That's the weather forecast. What on earth is happening this morning? Right, there we are. That's the picture I wanted to show you. As you can see, it's a camouflage jacket, and it's designed to tell you all about January's online talk event, which bookings are now open for. And this is going to be looking at how conspicuity clothing actually works in the real world. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the opposite direction, and I will actually start by discussing how camouflage works and how camouflage clothing operates, because when you've got an understanding of that, it's actually easier to get a grasp, get a handle on what might cause problems with the clothing you're wearing being conspicuous, even though sometimes people are believing that they're wearing conspicuous clothing. It turns out not to be. So that is coming up. That's Monday the 15th, 8 p.m. Don't forget, if you can't get there live, you can always catch up later. Follow the link for more information on that. Right, okay, so then we can go to the weather forecast. Now, it's a pretty cool start this morning if you've poked your nose out the door. It's bright and sunny here in London. It's actually a lovely looking morning at the moment, but it is cold. Fog is actually affecting western northern areas too. Now, temperatures right now across most of the country are only just above zero, and it will fall back even lower later this afternoon, this evening. So watch out for frost later if you are out later on the bike, and also be aware that fog could return in the far north of England and Scotland, so bear that in mind if your commute is tomorrow morning up in those parts of the world. The good news is that after the continual heavy rain of the last week, more on that in a moment incidentally, the outlook for the next few days is much drier but a colder spell of weather. Overnight frosts will be widespread, and that's because high pressure is establishing itself. So through Monday into Wednesday, plenty of sun around, particularly to the west of the UK, more cloud to the east, and that will be carried on what could be a brisk easterly breeze at times. Watch out for showers too across the east of the UK. They could be wintry at times, but the good news is we are still waiting for that beast from the east, which seems reluctant to put in an appearance. So, right, on with the next item, which is our starting news, right? The knock-on effect of all that heavy rain is still with us. Now, there are still plenty of flood warnings in operation, as it takes some considerable time for the saturated ground to drain and for river levels to drop in consequence. So here's actually a picture which I lifted off the .gov website, which shows you where the floods were as of yesterday evening. So there were 140 flood warnings had been removed, but there were 201 flood warnings where flooding is expected still in operation, and 217 flood alerts where flooding is possible. It's said that flooding along three major rivers, the Trent, Severn and Thames, is expected to continue for at least the next 5 days. So if you are planning a ride out today, it might be a good idea to have a quick look at where all this flooding is going on before you venture onto your bike, because you might encounter some roads that aren't actually navigable. Right, on with the rest of the news then. And now police in Kenya sadly found the body of a man who they believe was attacked by a lion as he was riding his motorcycle. Now, locals contacted the authorities because they found an abandoned motorcycle along a road near the Shimba Hills National Reserve. The investigating officers found lion paw prints leading from the motorcycle to a thicket where they found the fresh remains of an unknown man. The body parts were collected. They've been taken to a nearby hospital mortuary. They're trying to identify them. There will be a post-mortem, but the police statement says that the cause of death is likely to have been mauling by a lion. In Kent, a motorcyclist has suffered life-changing injuries. His bike hit a pothole and he is taking Kent County Council to court. Now, last Wednesday it was that I actually revealed the scale of the payouts by councils in compensation for the injuries and damage caused by potholes, and Kent actually topped the list. Now, this latest incident involved 37-year-old Darren Crooks. He was riding home on the A260 in Kent when he came off his GSXR 750 Suzuki. He lives near Wingham, near Canterbury. He hit a metal roadside barrier and needed almost 10 hours of surgery following what he said was a significant loss of blood. His injuries included fractured right femur, broken bones in his other leg and foot, as well as ruptured ligaments in his knee. Now, he also says that he was actually waiting at the roadside for an ambulance for almost an hour and a half, which is not great, is it? And he says if it hadn't been for the help of an off-duty paramedic who just happened to be passing by, it could have ended very differently. The suspension was apparently completely snapped in the incident, although whether that was the pothole or the impact with the barrier, I can't tell you. Now, Kent had the highest number of pothole-related deaths between 2018 and 2022. 15 deaths or serious injuries in total. KCC, however, are denying liability for this crash. It happened in April last year. though it seems immediately after the incident they did actually carry out an emergency repair to the pothole, which does seem to suggest that they thought that it needed repair. Now, the solicitor acting for Mr. Crook said the council could escape liability if it could show they had a good system of inspection and maintenance and repair of the road, and if the pothole was not there at its last inspection, and if they had received no complaints. So basically, the presence of a pothole isn't actually enough to successfully sue the council. And KCC indeed said, we last inspected the A260 in March that year, and they attended the site alongside Kent Police when the incident occurred, where clear photographs were taken identifying a, quote, small defect in the road, unquote. So for a successful claim, the pothole would also need to have been at least 50 millimeters deep, which is 2 inches roughly speaking, but it seems no independent measurements were taken before it was repaired. So bad news for the rider concerned there. Now, over to the EU. Back at the beginning of December, the MEPs sitting on the Transport and Tourism Committee approved a list of draft revisions to European Union driving licence rules, which included what were described as several common sense revisions. And these include a minimum 2-year probationary period for new drivers. We have that, of course, in the UK at the moment. And also making available a single digital driving licence to be available on a smartphone, which will be the full equivalent of the physical photo card licence that is currently issued. So it's likely, of course, that as we align our licences with Europe, we'll see the same measures being taken here. Now, the good news is that the proposal by the rapporteur Karim Deli for differential speed limits for motorcyclists, depending on what license they hold, under the tiered rules that we have for motorcycle licenses at the moment, which of course, as you know, means that there are A1, A2 and A licenses as well as the moped license. That was defeated on the vote. Now, if it had been successful, basically it would have seen riders on the A1 and A2 machines restricted to lower speeds than other traffic. Now, the point was made that a few drivers would actually have realised that the rider ahead of them on what appears to be quite a big motorcycle was actually restricted to a lower speed. And frankly, it's hard to see how actually deliberately introducing a speed differential between motorcyclists, who are already known to be vulnerable road users, of course, and the other traffic on the road around them would have achieved the claimed goal of reducing PTW casualties. Now, these draft proposals, they will be voted upon by the full House of the European Parliament later this month. So that's when they could pass into law. Now, if you're a biker in Edinburgh, here's a warning. The Scottish capital is about to become the first city outside of London to enforce a blanket ban on pavement parking. This comes into force on January the 29th, and if you do park on the pavement, you're going to be given either a fixed penalty notice of £100 or have the vehicle removed if it's a real obstruction. If you do pay within 14 days, the fixed penalty notice is dropped to £50. Now, the ban is designed to protect pedestrians, particularly the sight impaired or those using wheelchairs or pushing buggies, from being obstructed by vehicles blocking the footway. Now, the local authorities in Scotland, they were given these powers to stop pavement parking in December, and the Highland Council is another that has also confirmed they will be enforcing the new rules, but initially at least there will be a grace period where warning notices will be issued rather than fines. Elsewhere in the UK, in England, Wales for example, local authorities can restrict pavement parking on individual streets or by area by making a traffic regulation order, but it's not a blanket ban as it is in London or now in Scotland, where the councils will enforce this at their discretion. Now, most of the articles online, of course, always talk about the change and how it affects drivers, but because the legislation refers to vehicles, my thinking here is that if you park your bike on a pavement, possibly because you're parking up outside your house or you're looking into a lamppost or something similar, you will need to think again. The this changes the rules that have been in the Highway Code since 1974, actually. Currently Rule 244, which says drivers must not park partially or wholly on the pavement in London and should not do so elsewhere unless signs permit it. So there's something to think about. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy these shows, you will find they go out live Wednesdays and Sundays at 11. Very rarely I record a show. Very rarely I also may have to change the time of a show due to other activities, and even more rarely I will miss a show because I've just got too much else on, such as I did when I was in New Zealand last February, for example. Now, I don't particularly have favourite racers. I know a lot of people do, but if there's one person's career that I have followed, it's Ian Hutchinson. He's the 4th most successful TT racer of all time. And at 44, I don't think he would object to being called a bit of a veteran now. But his racing's always seemed to me to be sort of 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. Now, back in 2010, that's when Hutchie had his most successful year. He'd won a Supersport race at the Northwest 200 in May, but when he got to the TT, he followed that up by setting the record for the most solo wins at a single Isle of Man TT. He came home first, no less than 5 different events. Then, sadly, British Supersport round in September, he was taken out by a following rider and the crash shattered his left leg. Now, it took him months to make a recovery good enough to get on the bike, and unbelievably, he broke the leg again early in 2022 when he was actually practicing riding an off-road bike before an exhibition at the Excel Arena motorcycle show, so it wasn't even in competition. Now, he swapped the gear shift to the right, he put a thumb-operated rear brake on the machine, and he was back in the saddle, and by 2015 he was fit enough to win the Macau Grand Prix. Actually, that was 2014, I think. And then he got 3 more wins at the TT in 2015. So he seems to be back on track. 2016, he lapped at 133 miles an hour. It's still the 5th fastest lap of all time, but predictably after the highs and lows in 2017 he added 2 more wins to his TT tally, bringing it to 16, and then he crashed, breaking his thigh. Now, he was due to race in last year's event after lockdown, of course, put the TT on hold, but unfortunately he suffered a stroke, believe it or not, at the beginning of the season. Now, he has made a full recovery and he was back in training within weeks apparently, but race rules mean that he had to sit out a full 12 months before a medical assessment. But now it's been confirmed Hutchinson will be back for the 2024 TT, and he'll be reuniting with the Milenko by Paget's motorcycle team. That's the same outfit with which he claimed his historic 5 wins. I'll certainly be holding my breath for him. Now, some years ago, I featured an innovative airbag cycle helmet. It was basically worn around the neck as a sort of collar, but if you come off your bicycle, motion sensors detect the sudden movement and it inflates to surround the headlight. Now, I said at the time it might not just prove an acceptable alternative to those who do not want to wear a cycle helmet on a bicycle, but it could actually be an alternative to a conventional motorcycle helmet for riders of mopeds. Now, since then, the boundaries between transport modes have become increasingly blurred with the explosion in the numbers of the sort of so-called micro-mobility solutions, the little powered e-step scooters we are familiar with seeing now on street corners, the battery assisted electric bikes, and even full powered machines which are technically legal, but basically getting people to wear something like this on them and homologated for road use, I think could genuinely save lives. Now, sadly, in Sweden, despite winning multiple design awards and also beating conventional helmets in an independent safety test, I couldn't actually find out what that was, but that's the claim anyway. Hovding, the Swedish company behind these airbag helmets, has had to file for bankruptcy, and the reasons are unusual to say the least. The company says they had no other option because the country's consumer watchdog ordered a complete halt to sales as well as a product recall for the latest version of the helmet airbag, the Hovding 3. Now, Hovding have since won an appeal against the ban on sales and the product recall, meaning that the products can still be illegally sold. But the company said that, quote, the damage caused by the actions of the Swedish Consumer Agency is so extensive that the board does not see that there is a basis for continuing the company. And their statement went on to thank customers, dealers, suppliers, and employees too for all their fantastic efforts during the 12 years we have saved the lives of cyclists. Now, now, I have no idea why the product was suspended and recalled, so I shall do some digging into that. And if I find anything interesting, I will hopefully get back to you. And on to a motorcycle story, and this one is really, I think it's a warning shot fired across Triumph's bows. Zontes, the Chinese manufacturer, is pitching a new middleweight triple. Now, three-cylinder engines aren't new. Moto Guzzi, best known for their V-twins, they did have a 500 triple before the war. Kawasaki, Suzuki, of course, had their ranges of two-stroke triples. Yamaha had their four-stroke XS back in the late 1970s. The MV range, extensive success in MotoGP, the predecessor of MotoGP, the 500 GP World Championships, with three cylinders. And in recent years, we've seen the likes of Benelli and MV, and of course, most particularly Yamaha, who have all embraced the idea of the across-the-frame three-cylinder layout. But for me, at least, and I suspect for most viewers, the manufacturer most associated with triples is BSA Triumph. Now, the Trident and its close relative, the BSA Rocket 3, they were in production from the late 60s to 1975. I think that's when the final batch of Tridents came off the production line. So the last few were still around on sale just about the time I got into biking. I remember there being a desertified version, which had originally been built for a police force in the Middle East, but actually was returned and put on sale. That was the very last Triumph triple, I think, until September 1990, of course, when the new Triumph company was launched. And it's not perhaps very surprising that two of the machines that rebuilt the Triumph mark were actually triples. And right now, 30 years on, Triumph are still marketing a range of three-cylinder bikes. But somehow it's this is Zontes bike. It's a ZT703F, their adventure bike here. It seems like a direct attack on Triumph's entry models, and specifically their 660 Tiger. Now, it's based on an all-new 699cc liquid-cooled triple, and Zontes are actually claiming a peak power of 100 brake horsepower at 9,000 RPM, which is pretty darn powerful for the engine capacity. Torque, 63 pound-feet at 7,200 RPM, which means it's revvy but not ultra revvy, and basically that level of power and punch comfortably exceeds the Tiger 660. It is right up there with the Tiger 900's 888cc triple. So if the bike pulls this power off, it's going to be a fairly astonishing machine, I suspect. Now, whether the other parts are up to the standard of the Triumph is moot. There are unnamed upside down forks at the front. There is an adjustable monoshock at the rear. Whether they get all the damping adjustment that the other bike, the Triumphs, do, I don't know. Let's just give you a zoom in look at the bike. There it is. You do get Brembo brakes at the front, 4-piston radially mounted calipers. You get wire wheels, which are alloy rimmed, but they're also cross-spoked. So basically the spokes go to the outside of the wheel. And what this means is you can fit tubeless tyres to them. And that's something that I really do wish that other manufacturers would adopt. It solves the blowout problem when you're riding these things on the road. If you genuine off-road rider, then you can fit tubes if you want to. But for road riders, punctures, blowouts really should be something from the past. Now you do get a TFT panel. It's expected the bike will get riding modes and traction control. People have looked at the switch gear and said the buttons are there. There are also heated grips and an electrically adjustable screen. Now whether they are standard equipment or bolt-on, the pannier frames that you can see there, plenty of crash protection, and the bike also had a centre stand that was on display. Now the machine also appears to be likely to be joined by a sportier RR version. That actually makes even more power, 110 horsepower, 11,000 RPM, slightly reduced torque, 55 pound-feet at 8.6, so a Revia engine generally, but both are said to be fully Euro 5 compliant, and they are expected to appear in Europe at the end of this year. Now, no word on price at the moment, but I would not be surprised to see Zontes pitch their ZT703F at the Tiger 660 directly. Now, Zontes, their biggest problem is almost certainly their reputation as the manufacturer of cheap Chinese starter bikes. I've already seen people say that Zontes don't have the production standards of the Japanese or European machines. And to be fair, all too often those little bikes, they have proven a bit too cheap. Now, my guess is that the company will have significantly upped their game, because they'll need to if they're going to tap into this market that's traditionally dominated by the Japanese and Europeans. So, okay, that brings us to our final item for today. Don't forget, if you what was I going to say? I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. Forget it. No worries. We'll just go crack on with the last item. Now, a few shows ago, I did actually talk about the MCN interview with Suzuki's general manager for sales, motorcycle sales, and that is Akira Kuyaji. Now, I said that interview really, and the discussion that went on in it, it really only revealed how Suzuki's plans for their future were a bit on the vague side. Now, just to remind you of the timescale here, it was January last year that Suzuki laid out a definitive plan to introduce electric bikes. They said their first EV motorcycle would be in the small to mid-capacity class, and that was due to arrive sometime 2024, so in coming months presumably. And they said they would have a range of 8 motorcycles by 2030, but that for large motorcycles, for leisure purposes, the company would be considering adopting carbon neutral fuels. And I said when we got to that interview at the end of last year, it didn't really reveal anything, but it does look increasingly likely that Suzuki will follow Honda's lead with a small commuter machine, as he said that Suzuki remain on track to reveal their first electric two-wheeler this coming year. Now, it was notable, though, that the interview reiterated that further investment was being directed into, quote, alternative sustainable fuels. So I was also interested to see that MCN had managed to get hold of Yamaha's European president, Eric Desains, and they talked to him about Yamaha's own plans around the internal combustion engine, alternative fuels, and an electric future. Now, a bit of background, Yamaha have a long link with Toyota, and they have built for Toyota hydrogen burning engines. Now, if I remember correctly, they have provided the engine for Toyota, which was running in an endurance car racing series, burning the gas. Now, back in May, Yamaha also announced their partnership with Suzuki, Honda and Kawasaki Heavy Metal Industries for the development of future hydrogen burning internal combustion engines. And also at the end of last year, Yamaha promised that they would be showing off a prototype V8 hydrogen outboard engine at the Miami International Boat Show. So that's for February. That probably wouldn't be that distinct from the Toyota engine. That's my guess. Anyway, we'll have to wait to hear about that. But coming back to the MCN interview, what I was rather surprised to hear Dessaines say was, quote, "We know how to make a scooter run with hydrogen, how it works, and can manage it. But to make it real for our customers is another story, and we are not alone." So what's he mean? He says, quote, "Hydrogen is obviously a next generation technology, but it requires a lot of energy to produce," is what he means there. So until the world is producing more energy, cleaner energy, green energy, hydrogen is a dream. Now, that is very just different to the position that some of the other companies have been taking. But it's the point I've been making, frankly, for the last few years. Now, right now, as I've said and explained many times, the main source for the so-called clean hydrogen is actually very dirty coal and oil. Yes, you can use electricity to split water to produce hydrogen and oxygen, and in theory that's clean if you're using clean electricity. But then if you burn hydrogen in the air to create energy, the product isn't just water. There are also those unpleasant NOx tailpipe pollutants that many overlook when calling hydrogen green. So even if you burn hydrogen in a car or a motorcycle, the problem is that what the EU and the UK are mandating are emission-free tailpipe gases. So there will be nothing other than water in that tailpipe. You'd somehow have to clean out those NOx. But anyway, set the NOx issue aside at the moment. Right now we have nothing like the capacity to split water. And in the interview, Dessaines also pointed out that there are storage challenges for hydrogen too. Now, firstly, the problem is if you store hydrogen as a gas, which is relatively straightforward, you just need a tank strong enough to contain the pressure. Hydrogen has a lower energy density than petrol. So if you want a sort of comparable range for a motorcycle, you need fuel tanks to contain the hydrogen that are 3 times bigger than the fuel tank that you need to hold petrol. Hence the bulbous rear end on that modified H2 Kawasaki that was shown off last year. But if it's carried as a liquid, when obviously it can be compressed down a lot more, then things get much more complicated. Now, first of all, you need to maintain the liquid hydrogen at minus 253 Celsius or minus 423 Fahrenheit, if you can imagine that particular temperature, and that requires specialist well-insulated cryogenic tanks. They're bulky and they're heavy, and of course the problem is that if the insulation fails, then heat transfers in from the environment or possibly even from the engine, and that can cause boil off, which will cause a pressure build-up in the tank. Now, right now, the infrastructure for handling and refueling vehicles with liquid hydrogen or even gaseous hydrogen doesn't really exist. It would need a complete rebuild of our infrastructure. Dessaines continued, "This is why we are participating with this hydrogen consortium, because it's advanced technology. It's better that we share. It makes sense to have a consortium and work together until the market is ready." Yeah, they need to do a lot of research. But here's the crunch. He says that in the short term, the internal combustion engine is the best technology you can get. That's a fact. And here's where, again, I think the manufacturers are parting company with reality, because what he went on to suggest is that the answer is actually to continue burning liquid fuel, but synthetic liquid fuel. He says that would reduce emissions created during the production stage. And he says, quote, "The Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association did a study to evaluate the benefits of synthetic fuel and found if you use synthetic rather than mineral fuel, because you don't have to search to find the resource, you don't have to extract it, there's no transformation and transportation necessary to the place where you consume the fuel." Well, I'm not convinced about that. You still can move your synthetic fuel around. But anyway, he says that represents, quote, 50% of the fuel's CO2 footprint before it's even used. So basically, to refine petrol into from crude oil, then there's a big chunk of CO2 footprint. Make your synthetic fuel, you remove that. So MCN, of course, naturally see this as a lifeline to extend our petrol engine bikes, but as I said before, I don't think there's much chance of going down this route. Now, first of all, there's almost zero chance of using biofuels. Those are the ones that come from plant material, unless there's some radical new technology like seaweed farming and harvesting, for example. That has been suggested, and it could be very productive indeed. But more conventional growth of agricultural crops, switching that to agricultural land to biomass production for biofuels, is a non-starter because of the huge areas of productive farmland which would have to be switched away from food production to produce fuel for even a fraction of the number of vehicles on the planet. So that's not going to happen. And much the same at the moment applies to synthetic fuels. As I've just talked about with being hydrogen production, it's all dependent on cheap electricity, and we don't have cheap electricity to spare to power that process. So Desains seems to believe that more time is needed. I hope governments will understand and consider the 2030 2035 ban, because everybody will be in a corner and it will be difficult. Today it's not realistic. Now, I'm always dubious when I hear technology companies talking about a need for more time to develop technology, and basically it usually means that they want to maximize profit from existing technology rather than invest heavily in developing something new. And I don't think it's any coincidence really that the most astonishing technology advances always seen during war. You just have to look at 1939, 1945. Look at the aircraft. At the beginning of 1939, most air forces were still using significant numbers of biplanes. And by the end of the war, of course, we had the jet engine, and we'd entered the jet age. And I don't even want to talk about the weapons, but think about the development of nuclear power, for example. And that was just 6 years of development time. Now, more realistically, in my opinion, Desains does appear to think that there is a strong case for inner city electric motorcycles, and he says that he's convinced this is where we have to move with electric in the city. And he says for two reasons: first, you limit CO2 emissions where people live, and second, the main benefit is silence. Now, he says noise is a true pollutant that we have to control better. So we solve silence and CO2 emissions where people live, which makes sense. And he says electric technology is more or less okay in that context. If you ride 50 to 80 kilometers a day, it's manageable. And he does predict that all manufacturers will be moving in that direction. But of course, that begs the question, what are we going to do for bigger bikes? So I don't think that story is anywhere near an end at the moment. But anyway, it's interesting to see the somewhat different thinking there from Suzuki. I've mentioned the fact that Ducati are supplying the bikes for Moto E, yet seem dead set against electric road bikes. We've seen Triumph build what they called a very successful prototype TE1 electric motorcycle, and then promptly turn their back on it and say that it's not feasible for road use. So it seems to me that there is a sort of concerted pushback from the manufacturers, and I suspect this is for political ends rather than anything else. Anyway, that is it for today. Now, just before I call it a halt for today, I just want to wrap up the show. I want to tell you about my live talk events. The next one, of course, as I just reminded you, is going to be on the science of being seen and how camouflage works and why that has implications for clothing. And I also just want to remind you about the people who've supported and subscribed to my coffee channel over the last few weeks. So I'll just give them a shout out, and I've lost the list. Here it is: Howard, Diane, Nick, Nigel, Kelvin, Nafa, Hallam, and Anonymous. So to all of you, thank you very much indeed for your support. If you're not a supporter, why not think about popping over to my YouTube channel? And my YouTube channel, to my coffee channel. Do come over there, have a look, see what's available, and if you like what you see, that will be great. And finally, don't forget, if you can, if you're watching on YouTube, do subscribe and like. If you're watching on Facebook, again, try and subscribe to my channel as a follower and like the show. Always helps other people see it, and then everybody gets to benefit. Right, that is it for today. We have Kevin looked in, and we had Sue also look in. So good morning to both of you, and yeah. So thank you very much again for watching. Do remember the weather could be frosty later, despite the lovely looking sun at the moment, so do watch out for the roads. Be cautious of fog as well if you're commuting in early in the morning. That's it for today, so thank you very much indeed. Do make sure that you stay shiny side up if you are out there on your bike today. I'm Kevin Williams. This has been Elevenses. Thank you very much indeed for popping in.